Okay, welcome everyone. Tonight we're going to do 2 chapters. We're actually starting a whole new section on grammar, seeing how grammar fits into different methodologies of learning the inner dimensions of the Torah. So, excuse me, tonight we're going to do past, present, and future tenses as they play themselves out in grammar, and masculine and feminine. Those are the 2 chapters for those who have the books, chapters 36 and 37. So first we're going to start with a very, very important idea of Hebrew, and that is we'll call it the timeless element or the timeless dimension of the Torah. And we're going to see how this is played out. But really the source of this is the 4-letter name of Hashem. That the 4-letter name of Hashem, which appears over and over in the Chumash, 1,820 times. For those who have been part of our Tuesday classes, so we learned that the 4 letters of Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey means to bring into being. That's why sometimes as a connotation, we talk about the 4-letter name of God as Havaya. Sometimes we say Hashem as a connotation, but Havaya, and Havaya means to bring into being. That's what these 4 letters mean. But also these 4 letters are the 4 letters that make up the words in Hebrew for past, present, and future. Haya, Hoveh, Yiyeh. So along with the idea of bringing into being, the Ramban says that in the first verse of the Torah, the first word of the Torah, what did come into creation? What was the first initial creation? And he says time and space. Before creation, when there was only the infinite being, the infinite light of Hashem, in our concept, there was no time and no space, or was beyond time and space. So the fact that the essential name of God spelled, the letters spell out Haya, Hoveh, Yiyeh, past, present, and future, tells us that there is something eternal about the Torah, which is a revelation of God's will. And so there is a sense of eternity in the Torah. And that's what we're told, that all of the figures of the Torah, all the stories, all the mitzvot are archetypal. In other words, it appears that we're reading stories about things that happened a long time ago. But the eternal energy of the Torah is that these energies are being replayed, are being manifest, are being revealed within each person's life and in each generation. So one of the places that we see this is, it's on page 343. And this is something unique to the Torah, is what's called the Vav HaHipuch. The letter Vav, when put in front of a word, means and. That's its function. It's a connector word. It's a connector letter, the Vav. But in a mystical sense, but it's part of grammar, is in the Torah, when you put a Vav before a verb that is written in the past, you translate it in the future. And if it's a verb that's in the future tense, then there's a vav, this vav hahipuch. Hahipuch means it changes around. It's the same root as we learned from Purim, nahafochu, the energy of being able to turn something around. But here, this is turning time around. So if a verb is written in the Torah in the past, but it has a vav in front of it, we interpret it, we translate it as it's happening in the future, and the opposite. So this gives the Torah this eternal feeling to it that, like I said, it's not just stories happening a long time ago to individual people. These are archetypal energies that are with us all the time. Now, another device in the Torah, and everyone, all of the sages received the tradition, what's called Ein Mukdam V'Muchar B'Torah. There's no before and after in the Torah. Now, what does this mean? When we read the Torah, and we would read it like a story, if we didn't know better, we would understand that it's totally chronological. It's playing itself out exactly how it happened in chronological time. But we're told that this is not true, that there are many passages in the Torah that are not chronological. In other words, they're, as it were, out of place. And then, of course, we have to understand, why are they out of place? Why isn't it chronological? Now, there is disagreement among certain of the passages. Some opinions are that, no, this is chronological. Exactly how we're reading it in the Torah, that's the chronological time. And others will say, no, this passage here really happened years before, but for reasons that the Torah wants us to delve deeper, it's put over here. Like I said, the sages agree that this method called Ein Mukdam V'Muchar B'Torah, it's one of the chapters that we will deal with later, is also alerts us to the fact that we have to be aware that the Torah is not necessarily chronological in time. What this is like is sometimes, let's say in a movie, where you'll have what are called flashbacks. In other words, the story is proceeding, and then all of a sudden, the main character is having a flashback of something that happened in the past. Or many times in a movie, you'll see that the movie, in a sense, starts at the end. You see the end of the story, and then the movie introduces us to, well, how did it end up like that? The point being that, like in a movie, sometimes it's totally chronological, and other times it can be going back and forth. Well, the Torah is like that also, that there are certain parts that are relating to things that have happened already. And because the Torah is prophetic, there are certain things in the Torah that are basically prophesying about things that will happen in the future. So this is a very, very deep dimension of understanding the Torah. When we come to these different places where we see that something is being prophesied about something that will happen in the future, or there are, like, as it were, flashbacks to previous events. Like, what comes to my mind right now is we have this concept called Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. And as we've discussed many times, this is in the beginning of creation in order to allow an infinite God to make place, excuse me, as it were, for a world, there had to be a contraction of the infinite space. And then when the initial lights came into being, the first vessels were not strong enough to hold this light, and they shattered. This is what's called in the world of Tohu, the previous world. So we learned this concept, and it appears that it's something that happened in cosmology a long, long time ago. But when we read different stories in the Torah, in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve, there was too much light, too much energy and utopia for them to handle. They didn't really have the vessels. So we see that here's Shvirat HaKelim is actually playing itself out again. And then when Moshe breaks the tablets, this is the same energy of Shvirat HaKelim, of the breaking of the vessels, happening again. And then later, when the first temple is destroyed and the second temple is destroyed. So here we see a concept that at first glance, we might think it's something that happened a long time ago, actually even before this world, in a previous world. But here we see that it actually manifests in the present and the future. And especially in our own lives, where there's so many times where there's just too much energy, too much light, too much stimulus, and we can't handle it. So that's Shvirat HaKelim with the terms that we use. I'm freaking out. I can't handle this. This is too much. I need some space. I'm cracking up. All of these different expressions that we have, that is a manifestation of Shvirat HaKelim. So this is just one example of where you have, when you're dealing with archetypes, well, this energy manifests itself in all of our lives and in every generation. So this gives the Torah an eternal, in a sense, above time, transcendent nature to the Torah. Okay, so now we're just going to go into some examples. So on page 345, so this is a very, very important one. As we came to the mountain of Sinai, we came to the wilderness of Sinai on the first day of the month of Sivan. So in the Torah, it says, Bayom hazeh ba'u midbar Sinai. On this day, they came to Sinai. So Rashi picks up, there's like two different tenses going here. If it's something, if the Torah is trying to explain something that happened in the past, then why is it saying on this day, as if it's happening in the present? So Rashi says, a very, very important Rashi, he says this is to teach us that when we learn Torah, it should be as if it is being given to us today, just like it was given to us back at Mount Sinai in what appeared to be a one-time event. But here, Rashi says it's to teach us that when we're learning Torah, it's as if the Torah is being given to us right now. If I have a new understanding, it's the Torah is being given in the present. So this is such a wonderful way to relate to the Torah that we're learning. But here again, we see, here we're taking an event that happened 3,300 years ago, the giving of the Torah, but we're relating to it as the Torah is still being given to us. It's in a constant flow into this world. So there's actually a tradition among the students of the Baal Shem Tov, and they handed it down that sometimes when they were sitting and learning Torah with the Baal Shem Tov, they could have sworn they heard the shofars blowing from Mount Sinai. In other words, the Torah was given over in a way as if it was coming straight from heaven, with all of the phenomenon that we read about in the Torah that was happening when the Torah was being given on Mount Sinai. And one of them were the sound of the shofar. And so the students had this expression, whether they meant it literally, but what they did mean is it was as if the Torah was coming down from heaven and it was coming through the Baal Shem Tov directly to them, as if the Torah was being given and they could hear the shofars at Mount Sinai. So that's just a beautiful idea. Okay, so next, also I want to mention here a very, very important teaching from the Ramban, Nachmanides. So he explains that the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, later replaced by the temple in Jerusalem, and later replaced by the synagogue in our day, all of this was an attempt to, in a sense, capture the energy of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai as an ongoing experience. In other words, the tabernacle, the temple, and the synagogue, even today, is considered a holy place. There's many Jewish laws of how we have to treat a Beit Knesset. We don't treat a shul or a synagogue as just like any other space. There's certain laws of how the respect that we have to have when we're in a holy place. And the Ramban was saying that this was an attempt to capture the divine presence that was at the giving of the Torah. And we know that in the Mishkan, in the temple, the Shekhinah dwelt in the temple. There was an ongoing experience of the of the imminent presence of God. So this is another example where there was a one-time event, but then the Ramban explains that this one-time event, in a sense, we've tried to capture it and make it a living experience throughout all of Jewish history. So the next one is on page 345, and this is a very, very famous teaching from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. He's not the only one to give this over, but he expressed this many times, the idea that the world to come, usually we think of, and there is a reality to it, that it is chronological. There's this world, and when we leave this world, there is a world to come. Now here, the world to come has two meanings. One, on a personal level, when an individual leaves this world and their soul goes to a different dimension. So one of the ways we refer to that dimension is the world to come. And then there's this idea that after Mashiach comes, and after many changes in human consciousness, there will be an end result called the world to come. But Rabbi Nachman says that if you even just look at the words, you can literally translate it. Olam haba is a world that is always coming. it's not just something that will appear when we leave this world or at the end of time, but it's present in this dimension as well. And in fact, Rav Ginsburg says that the world to come is what is called in Chassidut the pnimius of this world. It's the inner dimension of this world. Now that's like saying that the future is the inner dimension of the present. Now we have this concept because in the Megillah, we just read Megillat Esther, and we saw that one of the words for the future, atid, is used in the Megillah meaning to be prepared. That the people had to be prepared to defend themselves. So the meaning here is, we can translate it as that the future is already prepared in the present. And this touches on the idea of prophecy, where God will grant a person either through a dream or a vision or a direct communication, something that will happen in the future or could possibly happen in the future, depending on how the people act. That's why all of the prophecies of the prophets was what's called al-tanai, was dependent on their behavior. So in other words, especially when the prophets came and said that if you don't change your behavior, the temple will be destroyed, it didn't mean that the temple had to be destroyed or would be destroyed. But they were saying that if you don't change your ways, it will be destroyed. And this was granted in prophetic experiences, granted to different prophets. So here they were experiencing and seeing the future in the present. That's why it's not unusual. It doesn't happen every day and to every person, but it's not unusual for a person to have a dream about something that is going to happen, and then it happens. This is not so unusual. It's very profound. And for many people, it has a profound effect on them when they dream about something, and then a day later, a month later, a year later, it happens. So in other words, the world to come is a world that is always coming. And the example that we have in the Torah is after Sarah passes away. So it says, Avram ba b'yamim, Avram zaken, ba b'yamim, Hashem berach et Avram bakol. Avram became old in wisdom, and he came into days, and God blessed him with everything. So there's much discussion. What does it mean he came into days? So one of the explanations is that Avram, especially after the whole experience of bearing Sarah, and in a sense, his awareness that he was still connected to her neshama, even though it was no longer in this world, it was in the world to come. So it says he came into days, meaning he had, as it were, 1 foot in this world and 1 foot in the world to come. He was able to transcend his experience of time, and he was able to experience both the present and future, as well as the past, in the present. And we all know how much of our time is spent thinking about the past. And like the Baal Shem Tov said, a person is where their thoughts are. So if our thoughts are in the past, in a certain sense, we're more in the past than we are in the present. Someone's body can be in the present, but they're totally in a past event. So this is just a little bit about this idea of the world to come. Now, another one is, this is a special bracha that we say at Hanukkah and at Purim. Every night of Hanukkah, we say this blessing, which is Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech olam, asher she'asa nisim lavotenu, bayamim hahem bazman hazeh. We're blessing God who did miracles for our forefathers. Bayamim hahem, in those days, bazman hazeh, at this time. Now, the simple understanding of what does it mean in this time? In those days, in this time of the year. So we're saying this at Hanukkah, and we say it at Purim also, meaning God did miracles back then for us at this time of the year. But many people interpret it that by Yamim Hahem, in those days, in this time, not this time of year, but those same miracles, the same type of miracles are still happening in our day. And this is particularly true of Hanukkah, which, with Purim also, the idea that it's not like God isn't doing miracles for us anymore. The last 75 years of Jewish history in Israel has been one miracle after another. And so especially at Hanukkah, when we're talking about the wars of a long time ago and how the few were able to defeat the many, and all the circumstances, historical circumstances about the time period of Hanukkah are so reminiscent of what's happening today, the fight for freedom, the fight against assimilation. Just like then, people were assimilating into the Greek culture, today into the Western culture. And the two time periods are very, very similar, but it's the ability to understand that it's not just that God did miracles for us a long time ago, b'yamim hahem, but also bazman hazeh, in this time, not just this time of the year, but in this time of history. So that's, again, this idea of seeing the Torah is not just chronological time, but there's a merging of different time periods and our sense of time. It also says in the Megillah, a very similar Torah, but we learn it from a different source. Excuse me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'hakol nהיה b'torah. So at the end of the Megillah, when it's talking about the establishment of the holiday of Purim, when it would be, and the feast, and matanot le'avyonim, gifts for the poor, and mishloach manot, ish l're'ehu, and giving gifts of food. It says, about the holiday, it says, nizkarim b'na'asim. It's remembered and it is done. In other words, when they set Purim for all generations, it's a holiday, it's circumstances that will be remembered, and we will do these various mitzvot in a way to remember and to observe the holiday. But in Chassidut, it's explained not just that it's remembered and it's done, but similar to what we just learned, just like these miracles that happened at the time of Purim are remembered, that same energy is done again, is revealed again, is manifest in our generations, in our lives. So it's the same kind of idea of being able to manifest the past in the present. And we just learned about being able to take the future and see its presence in the present. So that's our first chapter. As always, there's many more examples. We'll just end with one on page 347. So every month we do a ritual called Kiddush Levana, where we say different prayers, we sing some songs, we even dance around a little bit in recognition of the waxing of the moon. Every month, depending on the custom, either between the third day of the month up to the full moon, or from the seventh day to the full moon, we recognize the importance of the moon. We connect ourselves to the source of the Jewish calendar, which is a lunar calendar, and it's called Kiddush Levana, sanctifying the moon. So one of the passages, one of the verses we say is David Melech Chai v'Kayam. David Melech is alive and exists. So we'll ask, well, as far as we know, David passed away around 3,000 years ago. Why are we saying Chai v'Kayam? And we have many famous songs about David Melech Chai v'Kayam. He's alive and he's well established in the present. There's a similar one in the Torah, a discussion in the Talmud. And one of the sages say, Yaakov Avinu lo met. Yaakov did not die. So one of the other sages in astonishment says, what do you mean he didn't die? Look in the Torah itself. It says that he died. They embalmed him. They buried him. What do you mean he didn't die? So the sage said, are his children alive? Meaning his descendants. And so, of course, we are alive. So he said, if the children are alive, Yaakov Avinu lo met. Yaakov did not die. So again, this is this idea that the concept of only looking at time in a chronological way, the Torah transcends that. All these examples, and there are many more, that it's not just simply chronological time, but we have the past wedged in the present, we have the future wedged in the present, and that the stories of the Torah and the language of using past, present, and future tenses, many of them we weren't be able to cover. But many times a word is written in the present, even though it's explaining a past event. Or it's an event that the grammatical sense it's in the past, but it's translated into the future. So all of this was to explain or just touch on this idea of past, present, and future in the grammatical makeup of the Torah itself. Now, the next chapter is chapter 37, and this is dealing with masculine and feminine grammatically. Now, this is very important because English is not like this, but Hebrew is. It is a gender-based language. In other words, in Hebrew, a word, a noun, will be either masculine or feminine. And if it's masculine, then the then the adjective that will go along with it needs to match, needs to also be masculine. And if it's a feminine word, then the description of the word, the adjective, needs to go along with that. And the same thing, how verbs are connected to nouns, is that if the person doing the action is feminine, then the verb is going to be feminine. And if the person doing the act is masculine, then it's going to follow that. Now, in the Torah, though, there are many exceptions, that you'll have words that you would expect to be written in the masculine, but they're written in the feminine. And then you have words that are expected to be feminine, and they're written in the masculine. So, of course, these are not mistakes. These are, all of them are hints. Like we've learned so many times, there are so many hints and allusions in the Torah. So this is one of the methods. And Rashi and the commentaries and the Talmud will, they stick out. If you have an expectation of masculine tenses, and all of a sudden they're feminine, it's like, okay, what do we learn from this? So we're going to learn a few. And the first one is on page 348. And this is the blessing that Yaakov gave to one of his sons, Naphtali. And it says, Naphtali ayala shlucha hanoten imre shefer. A short blessing is that Naphtali is a hind, is a type of a deer that is sent forth. He gives goodly words. This is the blessing of Naphtali, that he would be, in a sense, swift like a deer that's running, that's sent out, and he gives goodly words. Now, Rashi points out that if Naphtali is a male, so if you're talking about a male, you would expect that the deer that he's being compared to would be in the masculine, but here it's in the feminine. So Rashi says, and we have to understand that right before Yaakov gave blessings to his sons, he said, gather around and I will reveal to you what will happen in the end of days. And then he begins to give them blessings. And we're told that he wanted to reveal what would happen in the end of days, but the Shekhinah left him. The Shekhinah left him, and he was not able to say, this is what's going to happen when Mashiach comes, this is when Mashiach is coming. But what we're told is that Yaakov, in a sense, hid many of what would happen in the future into the blessings. They're hinted at. So here, the fact that this deer that's sent is written in the feminine. So Rashi says this is alluding to the prophetess Devorah, that she came from the tribe of Naphtali. And of course, in the book of Judges, there's a whole story about Devorah, and including one of the 10 archetypal songs sang through history is from Devorah in the book of Judges. And it's one of our haftorahs that we read during the year. So that's what Rashi says. Rashi says it's purposely written in the feminine because Yaakov is hinting that this great woman would come from the tribe of Naphtali. And it ends by saying, he gives goodly words. But it's really she who gives the goodly words because she came up with this song. But in a sense, because she was a warrior and she led the war against Sisera, so it's as if it's a masculine energy that is giving these goodly words, but it's really Devorah. And actually, if you take the words, this deer that is sent, and then the next word, he spelled the first letters are an acronym for Isha, a woman. It's hinting that there's a woman hidden in the story here. Prophetically, Yaakov is alluding to Devorah. Now, the next one is a very, very important one on page 350. And this is in another couple parshas. We'll get to the parsha of Acharei Mot, where for the first time the Torah describes Yom Kippur, describes the service of the high priest on Yom Kippur. And that's the headquarters of everything we know about Yom Kippur in the Torah is from this parsha called Acharei Mot. And one of the things it says, Bezot, well, I'll read it in English. With this shall Aaron come into the sanctuary with a young bullock for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. So part of the service that the high priest did, the bullock, this is an atonement for the golden calf. And it's a bull, it's a male cow. But in Hebrew, when it says with this, Aaron will come with this bullock, it's written in the feminine, bezot, not bezeh. So everyone mentions, like, why is it written in the feminine? Bezot yavo Aharon. With this, Aaron will come. So they learn from this a very, very important thing, not just halachically, but philosophically, is the law is that the Kohen Gadol, in order to do the service on Yom Kippur, has to be married. He has to be married. And that is the hint, Bezot Yavo Aaron. In other words, he's doing the service, but he has to have the energy of his wife with him. Bezot Yavo Aaron. And so why this is so important philosophically is because there are many different philosophical teachings or paths or religions where someone to be holy, or a holy person, or the priest or the spiritual leader needs to be celibate, because of the belief that the more we extract ourselves from the physical world, that's the only way to really be holy and spiritual. The more we're engrossed in this world, that it prevents us being spiritual. So this is not the Jewish way, and this is one of the places where it's pointed out. Here it's the high priest on Yom Kippur who has to be married. He can't do the service if he's not married, because he's considered incomplete. So this is a very, very different way of looking at holiness. That holiness is really only through the combination and the union of male and female, of masculine and feminine. So this is a very, very important thing, and it's alluded to again in the grammar, that instead of saying bezeh yavo Aaron, it says bezot. So that's a very, very important one. Now the next one is so important and so meaningful, and this is on page 351, and this regards Shabbat. So we have 4 prayers on Shabbat, and Shachrit and Musaf, the morning prayer and the additional prayer, both part of the morning. So in other words, in Shabbat, there's really 3 periods of time. There's Friday night, there's Friday day, and then there's towards the conclusion of Shabbat, where we eat the 3rd meal and we daven the afternoon prayer. So the first part of Shabbos, we have our first meal. The second part, the afternoon, we have the afternoon meal. And then we have the what's called the 3rd meal and mincha time. So in the Amida, in the silent prayer of Shabbat, so we, as part of it, we say that we will rest in it, that the Jewish people rest in the Shabbat. So what's interesting is at night, the whole passage is exactly the same for all of the prayers, except one change, and that's the word it. Now, it can be, depending on the grammar, can be male or female. So here at night, we say vayanuchu ba. We rest in her. In the day, we say vayanuchu bo, and we rest in him. Now, this is talking about Shabbat. So at night, Shabbat is referred to, the it of Shabbat, as a feminine energy. In the day, it's a masculine energy. And at 3rd meal, it's plural, vayanuchu bam. And we rest in them, meaning male and female together. So this is pointing out something very important, because Shabbat has different time periods. The night is one energy, Friday night is a certain energy, Shabbos day is a certain energy, and the conclusion of Shabbat is a certain energy. And so the sages, when they made these prayers, they used the gender to explain the energy of that part of Shabbat. That's why Friday night, we relate to Shabbos as the Shabbos bride. Of course, in the song Lecha Dodi, where we refer to Shabbat as a bride, as a feminine energy. During the day, we relate much more to the idea of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. There was a more masculine energy. And then 3rd meal, and this is such an important idea in Chassidut, because some people, when you get to the end of Shabbat, so they start looking at their watch, like, okay, it was great, but let's get back to the week. But in Hasidic circles, the high point of Shabbat is really the conclusion. And that's why it's called Vayanuchu Bam, in them, because that's where Shabbos completely comes together. And this is really seen in the tradition, really throughout Israel, but especially in the Hasidic tradition, to do a lot of singing at the 3rd meal, at the conclusion of Shabbat. And the energy is very different. The beginning of Shabbat is very high, happy, joyous kind of energy. The day is more studious, we'll say, and the end of Shabbos is deep. It's profound. So Reb Shlomo used to say, Friday night is high. Shalashudas, 3rd meal, the conclusion of Shabbat, is deep. Friday night's high, and the end of Shabbos is deep. And the songs that we sing during these times reflect these different energies. And again, it's reflected in the use of Vayanuchu Ba, which is feminine, Vayanuchu Bo, masculine, and Vayanuchu Bam, which is plural, a unity. So now that we've mentioned this, I just want to mention something. There are many, many other examples, but we're getting towards the end of our time here. Is something I've mentioned before, is that one of the great revelations of the Zohar, and then it became the foundation of all Kabbalah and Hasidut, is the unity of masculine and feminine. In the Zohar, virtually every single page of the Zohar, what it does is it takes the Torah, because basically the Zohar is a commentary on the 5 books of Moses. Many additional sections put in, but it basically follows the portions of the Torah. And the Zohar, in a sense, finds in virtually every verse this idea of masculine and feminine. Now here we're going beyond just what the grammar is telling us, that the Zohar understood that the inner dimension of the Torah is this unity of masculine and feminine energies. And it's important to say the word energies. We're not talking about males and females. We're not talking about male bodies and female bodies. We're talking about masculine and feminine energies, which we all have. Every male has both masculine and feminine consciousness, and every female has both masculine and feminine consciousness. This is the secret that Adam was created both male and female, because that is engraved in our consciousness, even after Adam and Eve were separated. But still, the reason that they were together is because the reality of the world is a unity of these two energies. And that's why, along with this, the Zohar translates everything in the Torah according to the Sfirot. Every verse is a manifestation of different combinations of the Sfirot. And the Sfirot are also a male-female kind of energy, where the right side of the Sfirot is what's considered the masculine, and the left is the feminine, and the middle column, which is the most important, is the unity of male and female. And so one of the things that the Arizal, based on the Zohar, so he came up with a kavana that is used extensively throughout all communities, depending on the mitzvah, depending on the prayer. But the Ari came up with this formula that before saying a prayer or a blessing or doing a mitzvah, we say l'shem yichud kudsha brichu v'shchinte l'yached shem yud and hey and vav and hey b'yachud shalim b'shem kol Yisrael. There's a few different ways that we say it, but I'll go back. L'shem yichud kudsha brichu, for the sake of unifying the Holy One, blessed be He, which is considered a masculine energy, the Shechinte, and the feminine aspect of God. Again, L'shem yichud kudsha brichu Shechinte liyached, to unify the name Yud, which is considered a masculine letter, and Hey, which is considered a feminine letter, and Vav, which is considered a masculine letter, and the second Hey, which is a feminine letter. B'shem kol Yisrael, for the sake of all of Israel. So here we could see that the Ari, he took this idea based on the Zohar of understanding how the energy of the whole world, of all of reality, is this combination of masculine and feminine energies, and seeing it manifest throughout the entire Torah, and even in what we call the essence of God, because God is not male or female. God is a unity, is really beyond our concept of masculine and feminine. Nonetheless, we talk with the language of human beings. So the Ari came up with this formula for the sake of unifying the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah, and to unify the 4 letters of God's name, which are masculine and feminine, for the sake of all of Israel. So here we see this idea of masculine and feminine, which, like, we just touched on a few examples, but there are many, many examples, and the Talmud deals with it, Rashi deals with it. When you have a word that it's expected to be masculine, it's feminine, so it's like, whoa, what is it? What's the message? What is it trying to tell me? And so there's many discussions in Rashi, the other commentaries, the Talmud, explaining why is it that it's not what we expected. So tonight we did 2 more chapters. We're past the halfway mark. We're doing great. Pesach is like, we started around Rosh Hashanah time. We're halfway through the year, and we're halfway through the book. So a big yeshu koach for everyone coming aboard and learning together. And Bezrat Hashem will be able to finish the second half of the book as well.